when we talked about time and resource boundaries is I'll coach people on the family member or friend that shows up unannounced and they start to have resentment towards that person. Or, mother-in-law said she was coming and then she comes and she stays too long and I don't know what to do. And what you can actually just offer them is, especially if they show up unannounced, is we really appreciate you visiting us. But if you don't give us advance notice, we won't be available to visit with you, right? So they can come, right? But it doesn't mean I'm going to open the door. And it doesn't mean that if I was planning on going to the grocery store, I'm going to sit there and entertain them. I'm just going to be like, I'm going to the store now, right? Like, and it's not in a way that's like, it comes from a place of curiosity and compassion for yourself and for them, not in a punitive way. Like once you communicate that boundary and they're aware, then you have the right to hold space for yourself. Hi, and welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast, episode number 96. If you are listening in real time, it is December 19th. This is the week, the big holiday week. Hanukkah started yesterday, which was Sunday the 18th, and ends on Monday, December 26th. And then Christmas is going to be this weekend on Sunday. And then next week, we're looking at New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, of course. And so if you celebrate any of these holidays, I'm sure that the holidays give you different thoughts and you have different emotions around the holidays. And so I've been thinking about this episode for a little bit, and I wanted to publish it this week just to get you kind of geared up for being around your family around the holidays. And maybe if this is the year you started to have better boundaries, being able to navigate that this season with your family, because now, like I said, you've probably, heard it on here or read the books and learned a little bit about boundaries. But now it's time to actually go out in the world and put them into action. And so I wanted to create this episode with that in mind. If you missed my Boundaries and Navigating Holidays masterclass and you would like a replay of it, the replay is still available. You can sign up to join my email list. I'll put it on the show notes. Or you can email me, hello@stethoscopestoswaddles.com, and just say, could I get the replay to the Boundaries Masterclass? So if that's you, please know that you can reach out and get that. And once you join my email list, then you will always receive information about upcoming masterclasses, and you can sign up, and then you can also receive your replays on there because that goes in a private members-only podcast. So welcome to the episode. Hey, Mama, you deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. Before I begin, this past week, I talked about disciplining around the holidays. And so I was thinking a lot about just, being with our kids and our kids being around maybe family and the things that come with that, children being around our family members, and just different conversations that happen. And one of the things I really wanted, before I forget, because I sometimes get on a tangent and forget, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about boundaries for our children around family members. One of the reasons I do this is because, many of us were raised in cultures of, doing what the elder said or doing what was expected of us by older people. And this kind of gets tricky in the holiday season when we are also trying to teach our children body autonomy and we're trying to teach them decision making. And I just wanted to offer this thought for our children's body boundaries and their physical boundaries around the holidays is that you will encounter some family members who maybe want to hug your children or kiss on your children. And you may find yourself kind of not knowing what to do. And what I want to offer to you is that if you are trying to create that safety for your children, especially around family and friends, is to be okay with telling your child, giving them the option whether or not they want to be touched. And so that can look like, instead of saying, give grandma a hug, give grandpa a hug, asking our child, do you want to give grandma a hug, right? Then they get to make that decision for themselves. And the reason I offer that, again, since we're talking about boundaries, is that physical boundaries are very important boundaries. And I think it starts with us knowing that for ourselves and then teaching our children the same thing and holding space for them to navigate those boundaries for themselves. So what I really wanted to talk about is when you think about boundaries, and if you listen to the boundaries podcast episode that I did, I think a year ago, boundaries are really for you. Boundaries are not for the other person, the person who maybe needs you to have a boundary with them. And boundaries are really about expectations and needs, and we have to be so clear not to mix boundaries with manuals. Sometimes what people are describing as what they want to have boundaries are like, you need to have boundaries, is literally describing, tell your mother-in-law not to do this, or tell your mother-in-law she must do this. And that's really manuals because it's what we think mothers-in-law should do, or, sisters-in-law should say or do. And that can be kind of like a gray zone. And I want to clarify that for you. The second thing is that the role of boundaries is to really create safety and comfort for ourselves so that we can, exist in the places and spaces that we do from a loving place. And last but not least, it's really about a self-care practice. It's how do you create comfort and safety for you in order to cultivate your own self-care. So boundaries also, when you think about them from the self-care aspect of it, right? It acts as a safeguard from you overextending yourself and giving so much of yourself, going out in the world and overextending yourself. It also gives you clarity and healthy relationships, which in turn translate into safety in relationships. Also, it helps us to communicate what is and isn't acceptable to us. I wanted to kind of touch on just the different types of boundaries, and there's different ways to describe the different types, but I wanted to talk about the four main ones, which are physical, intellectual, time, resource boundaries, and mental or emotional boundaries. And I wanted to talk about them in the aspect of what does a violation of that boundary maybe look like. So the first one is physical boundaries. So that is literally, this is my body, this is your body, and this is the space between us. So a violation of a physical boundary can be unsolicited touching, or hugging. And when I did the masterclass, I literally remembered we trained with this one faculty member who would rub your shoulder after you put the patient to sleep. And I get it, in his mind, maybe it was an endearing way. But to me, it had very creepy energy to it. And as a trainee, I just didn't speak up for myself. So I was that boundary was so blurred that I didn't feel safe even saying, I don't want to be touched like that, right? So when you think about physical boundaries as far as unsolicited hugging and touching, right, there's obviously extremes of it. And we were watching one of the Disney Christmas classics, and it was funny. We watched an old one and then we watched a more recent one, one of the Disney classics. And they were talking about, it was one segment of the episode where it was Donald Duck's nephews. Aunt Gertie comes in and she's like, give me kisses. And, the little boys are so traumatized. And in the new one, the little boys came up with swimming goggles and scuba equipment because she would just kiss on them, right? And when we think about little children, when they are in situations with family members where they are given hugs, or they are kissed, or they are, patted on the shoulder without permission, it's a violation of a boundary, even though the intention may be clean. So when we think about in adulthood, I've talked to people who are my father-in-law inappropriately touched me, inappropriately touched my mother, inappropriately touched my sister. He gives the most uncomfortable hugs. And so when we also marry into families where those kinds of boundaries are violated on a regular basis, and then we have to spend holidays with those family members, right? We have to know what our boundaries look like so that we can clearly communicate them and clearly enforce them. And just to touch on that a little bit, I'll get into it a little bit too in just a little bit. But I was thinking about the fact that like we often forget that our families of origins have different family boundaries, right? And so, for example, some families, triangulation is very common. And this is like families which don't have boundaries, obviously. And it could look like mom calling to tell your brother about you and then calls your other sister to tell her about your brother. And so there's a lot of enmeshment and triangulation in those relationships. And it could also be families that don't have physical boundaries, right? So you marry into a family that doesn't have physical boundaries and you come from a family that's not very physically expressive. It can be very uncomfortable to even like begin, like, where do I communicate that I'm uncomfortable with this form of touch or communication, right? The second one is intellectual boundaries. And so intellectual boundaries are like really our thoughts, our beliefs, our religious convictions, our political views. And these are really like our intellect, right? And so one of the things that comes up during holidays with families is, you'll have the one family member that has a different political opinion from you and they want to say something. And so a violation can look like name calling because the person has beliefs or values that are different from yours, or yelling during disagreements, or just like maybe in situations of divorce or separation where one parent is demeaning the parents in front of the kids. It can even be like in your family of origin, maybe your in-laws start saying like unkind things about you in front of your children. So it's an intellectual boundary violation. The third boundary is time or resource, right? So it is about a violation of your own time and a violation of the resources that you have. It could be money, but mainly like just availability and proximity. So a violation of this could be like, when people in your family show up unannounced because they don't value your resource and time as far as like how available you are. It can also look like when you have family members that demand that you drop everything you're doing and help them at their convenience, right? So that's a violation of your time and resource because they assume that you will just be readily available on call for them. The fourth boundary is mental or emotional boundaries. And so that is like your own mental health and peace of mind and safety. And the violation of that can be when you have situations of emotional dumping or oversharing. So you may have that one family member or friend or loved one who just comes and just dumps all their emotions on you. And it can also be somebody who comes to crowdsource their decision making. And I recently learned a phrase for that is an ask hole. Somebody who comes and asks you, like, what do you think I should do? What do you think I should do? What do you think? But they're never going to do the thing that they ask advice for, that you gave them advice for. So those are kind of just like some basic boundary violations that you may see. I wanted to touch on the thought of family dynamics and the role of boundaries when it comes to understanding our own families of origin. And I wanted to come from a place of awareness in terms of like, no two families are alike, right? No two families do things the same way. And so it may be that you come from a family where boundaries are like a foreign language. Like you're literally like, how do you even begin with that? Like what does that even look like? And you have to remember that just starts with understanding and accepting of people and who they are. If you are like just appraising your family of origin versus maybe your spouse's family of origin, you can maybe start to notice some ways in which boundaries were not present in either your family or your husband or wife's family of origin. Usually a scenario is like when like a person, either you or your partner, get into contact with your family, and after being around them or communicating with them, the person becomes depressed, argumentative, self-critical, perfectionistic, angry, combative, or withdrawn. The way it was described by Dr. Henley Cloud and Dr. Townsend in their book Boundaries, it's literally like it's like they catch a virus once they're around their family of origin. And then the problem is they actually pass on this virus to their immediate family. So the family of origin has the power to affect basically the new nuclear family in a trickle-down effect. one of the things that you give away your power in terms of like there's boundary problems and your relationship with one person has the power to affect your relationship with other people. So the second one is what the doctors Cloud and Townsend call second fiddle. It's when you are like basically playing second fiddle to the spouse. As the spouse, you get the leftovers because you see like your partner cares more about his parents or her parents' wishes more than they care about your wishes. So you kind of just sense that you come second after the family of origin. And it doesn't mean that like families should not have like relationship with their extended family. It's almost where you just have to be aware that you have to have clear boundaries with your family of origin, because if one partner fails to set clear boundaries with their family of origin, then the spouse and their children will get leftovers, right? Because the primary resourcing of emotional and physiological and presence goes to the family of origin instead of the nuclear family. The other one is when you can see how there's boundaries is that in some families, all decision making as far as finances goes through the parents. And so when you are married, your parents, like your spouse's parents, are still maybe supporting you, even emotionally. Like when you haven't created that adulthood in your relationship where your needs are cared for by yourself, and you don't always get to have a child like almost relationship with your parents as an adult, right? And it can also be like you can have the financial resources, but then you allow your family of origin to do certain life management functions for you. So it can look like it's an adult. As an adult child, you're always hanging out with your parents. You go on vacations with them. Your parents come to your house and they do your laundry, and you eat everything at your parents' house. Or the best one is when you believe that your parent, like let's say as a wife, you're like, my mom is my best friend, my confidant, and we share everything, right? And while that sounds good, it's a very clear sign of enmeshment, because the children do not separate with clear boundaries. So they're still like almost their parents' children, but they're adults, right? So then what also may happen is, as long as everybody is doing what the family expects, everybody is happy. But then there may be like, if you kind of veer out of that, like you kind of might get cut off, right? The other thing that I wanted to kind of describe is what triangulation is a little more in detail. So what triangulation is you have three people, A, B, and C. So A is angry at B, but instead of A going to tell B, A calls C to complain about B. Then C listens, right? But B is feeling lonely because nobody calls, and then calls C. And then in passing, they're like, oh yeah, me and A had this conflict. And then the C now is carrying the secrets of A and B, but A and B still haven't had their conversation, right? So basically, C basically is like in the center of the triangle. So, and in the boundary problem in this is like, because it's used in a way to comfort and validate people who are afraid of confronting each other. But what it just creates more conflict that continues to persist. So that is just one thing I wanted to touch on and just like make you aware. Another dynamic is in grown sibling relationships where maybe if an adult child is not very responsible, they are depending on a responsible adult sibling to avoid growing up and leaving the family. So it's like, the one person in the family is feeling a lot of guilt and pressure because they're taking care, quote unquote, of that sibling, but it's very like uncomfortable for them. So why do we even like continue to have those kinds of relationships, right? It's because sometimes we just haven't even ever known that there's anything different other than that, right? So how can you tell maybe if you don't have boundaries? One of the ways is just to look at your own life and just see if there are any boundary problems with your parents or your siblings. So look at the areas in which you've lost control of your personal property and seeing that, and then maybe think about like, what are the dynamics that are being played out? Are you triangulating? Are you taking responsibility for a parent or a sibling instead of being responsible for them, right? Or do you fail to enforce consequences and then end up paying for other people's behavior? Are you passive and reactive towards them and their conflict, right? So you can't get out of that dynamic until you first understand, like, what are you doing to perpetuate that, like, unclear boundary? What I wanted to talk about in terms of boundaries is to look at when we think about a thought model that has to do with boundaries, what are some of the emotions, feelings, or thoughts that might be happening that are a classic example of lacking boundaries? So one of the examples that I shared in the workshop is when you maybe are thinking about going to spend time with your family and you just feel overwhelmed. And you're like, my mother-in-law is always like asking for things that we can't offer, but I want to help her. It's always there's always a sense of like, you're almost a savior mentality, like, no, but I can't not go because I have to help my mother-in-law. And so the circumstance is really just your mother-in-law says words or does a thing. And the thought is she's always, doing something that I don't want her to do, but I want to help her. So what you might start to do is avoid her or like feel exhausted after spending time with her. And the result of that model is that you end up actually not wanting to help her, right? The other one that can be an emotion that's present is when you feel like you're obligated to spend time with family members during the holidays, but the thought that you have is, I have to do it or they won't like me or they'll be mad at me or they'll be upset or they'll be hurt. And so that creates eventually a feeling of resentment because you're doing things because you're expected to, not because you want to. And so what are the actions that you might take? You may do it unwillingly. You may complain. You may actually present yourself as the hero of the story. You may go telling everybody that has ears what a horrible family you married into or what a horrible family you have. But really, what ends up happening is that you do things that you don't want to do. And the result of that model is actually that you're mad at yourself because you're not even doing things that you want to be doing, right? You're doing things that are basically like you're expected to do them. So I was thinking in terms of if you wanted to have what we call an intentional model, what are the feelings that you would want to have when you are around your family members? And a lot of the time is that what we are trying to do is that we want to feel a different way, but then we want the other people to create that feeling for us. And if you've been listening for a while here, you know that I totally know and believe that the reason we take action is based on how we feel. And the reason we feel certain emotions is based on what we think about our circumstances. And so in no way would another person be able to actually generate an emotion for you. You would generate that emotion from your own thoughts. So going back to the family dynamics and spending time with your family, if you are having the thought that, you have to help them out of obligation, right? It doesn't create an emotion of compassion or curiosity or even wanting to do the thing. It literally just makes you just not want to do the things, right? So I just wanted to offer you maybe even just going away from the emotion of resentment or overwhelm to just maybe curiosity and compassion or acceptance, just realizing, oh, that's the way this person always shows up. What can I create a boundary to create my own safety that still allows them to be who they are, but it protects me as a person? It ensures that my own safety is not compromised and my own emotional well-being is not compromised. Because when you catch yourself in people-pleasing mode, right, the resultant emotion in people-pleasing is usually resentment or disappointment because you start to resent the fact that you have to do all these things for those people, or you're disappointed because when you think that you may need their support or their assistance, they're not available, and therefore it may create just that added resistance. That is one of the thoughts that I was thinking about in terms of what would be the emotion that you would want to generate in order to have better boundaries. I wanted to share some examples that I shared in my masterclass of some ways in which you can clearly articulate your boundaries, hold space for yourself, and create safety for yourself. What it can look like is, let's say you are, having dinner and somebody in your family is just being very inappropriate or talking about a political thing that you don't want to be a part of and engaging you and really pulling you into the conversation. And you just feel like you have to sit there and basically suffer fools gladly. And what I want to offer you is just like maybe using this statement by saying, this conversation is making me feel very uncomfortable and I will not engage you. That way, they can talk all they want, but you get to create that boundary that if they continue to speak and you don't want to participate, you can leave the room. And you've already let them know that you're going to take action when that happens. The other one can be when you're in a situation with family or friends or anybody really, and they are speaking to you in a way that is very disrespectful, and you just instead of sitting there, you can just say, I'm upset that you're speaking to me this way. I'm leaving. And then you leave. You got to leave because otherwise you're the boy that cried wolf, right? The other one that I kind of mentioned in passing last episode was when people want to tell you, oh, maybe you should discipline your kid like this, or, oh, I don't like the way your kid does this, or, oh my gosh, your kid is so this and your kid is so that, and, oh, is he meeting this milestone, and are they doing this and this thing? And I want to offer you this boundary just to communicate your unwillingness to participate in those conversations. And what that sounds like is, my kid's behavior is not up for discussion. If you continue to criticize my parenting, I'm going to leave the room, right? So they are welcome to continue criticizing your parent. You're just not going to be present for that conversation. So one other thing I was thinking about is when we talked about time and resource boundaries is I'll coach people on the family member or friend that shows up unannounced and they start to have resentment towards that person. Or, mother-in-law said she was coming and then she comes and she stays too long and I don't know what to do. And what you can actually just offer them is, especially if they show up unannounced, is we really appreciate you visiting us. But if you don't give us advance notice, we won't be available to visit with you, right? So they can come, right? But it doesn't mean I'm going to open the door. And it doesn't mean that if I was planning on going to the grocery store, I'm going to sit there and entertain them. I'm just going to be like, I'm going to the store now, right? And it's not in a way that's like, it comes from a place of curiosity and compassion for yourself and for them, not in a punitive way. Like once you communicate that boundary and they're aware, then you have the right to hold space for yourself. So the other one that I was thinking about is holiday invitations and expectations and rituals. And I did a episode on just like rituals and shared meaning in relationships. And one of the things I talked about is not all family rituals are fun for many people. And so when you're thinking about the expectation that we have to spend Christmas with these people and we have to do these activities and you've reached the point where you don't want to do it, I want to offer you can just say, thank you for inviting us to the celebration. We're creating a new family tradition and we won't be joining you this year, right? So I coached one attendee of my webinar on this with her being the recipient of that boundary. And she was like, well, but I would want to know if I did something wrong and I would want to know if I hurt them. And what I was trying to offer her was, when people create boundaries, when we find discomfort in them, it is not the job of the people with the boundaries to make us feel comfortable, right? So if you find discomfort in a boundary that's being created that's affecting you, then you have to go inside and take ownership of, okay, let's say they're mad at me. If they haven't expressed that, I can either check in and be like, is everything okay? And if they say everything's okay, I don't have to make it mean anything about myself if somebody doesn't want to spend the holidays with me. Because conversely, if you've decided you don't want to spend the holidays with somebody, it doesn't mean you hate them. It doesn't mean they hurt you. You just have decided this is not working for me right now. I want to change something. So you can allow them to have that agency, right? So, the holidays, again, like I said, it can be a very difficult time, because you want to be around people, you want to be around your family, but you also want to have peace of mind. And what I will offer you is that the best boundaries you can make are the ones that you make from love, right? So it doesn't mean that when you create boundaries, you stop loving people. In fact, boundaries give you freedom, more freedom to love, right? Because you then lose that need to like people please and deny yourself of things that you want, and you create boundaries so that you can support yourself and have safety for yourself. So when you are creating those boundaries, you can just see them from a place of, oh, this is actually the best thing for me to do for myself and for this relationship and for the people that are in my life that want us to have this dynamic, right? Now, listen, you're not going to like tell somebody your boundary and they're going to be like, great, that's the best boundary. You may get resistance. And one of the ways that you may get resistance is anger. And just realize, though, that when somebody gets angry at you for having a boundary, it's actually a character issue for them because they're really being self-centered and they're having this belief that the world literally is for their comfort. And they also see others as extensions to themselves. So when they hear no, to them, it's like when a 2-year-old is told they can't have something and they're like, I don't like you, mommy, right? They feel like the person who is taking away that wish or desire is bad, and so they become angry. So they're not like, they're just like making it about them. They're making it mean something about them, but it's not. But on the other hand, if you're setting the boundary, you have to view it as it's a normal reaction for some people. But don't let that be the reason that you maybe start to second guess your boundaries. Those are important. The other thing you may get is they may try to guilt you into feeling, oh, you've done something wrong. So it could look like, how could you do this to me after all the sacrifices I've made for you? It seems that you could think about somebody else other than yourself for once, or if you really loved me, you would still come and celebrate Christmas with us. How can you abandon the family? It seems you wouldn't care enough about the family to be with us. So it can be that kind of conversation. And sometimes, especially if you have like Christian religious beliefs, you can hear this like thing. It says, doesn't the Bible say you should honor your parents? Or you're not being very submissive. I'm sure that grieves the Lord, right? Or, oh, I thought Christians were supposed to think about other people, right? Or whatever religion you're in, they may be like, what kind of religion would teach you to abandon your own family, right? So just notice that can happen. And the reason they're doing this is because they're trying to create a thought, like give you this thought so you can feel guilty about your choices. So you have to be very firm in your choices and decide that if you feel bad about your boundaries and haven't recognized the guilty messages, just notice them for what they are. Because sometimes they're anger in disguise. They may be hiding sadness and hurt. And if that guilt actually works in you, what Drs. Cloud and Townsend say in their book is that if guilt works for you, recognize that this is a you problem and it's not a them problem. So another boundary reception can be when you get like counter moves where maybe there's a little bit of blackmailing where it's like, well, if you can't spend Christmas with us, we're going to take you off the inheritance, that sort of thing. So when you are making those boundary decisions, there's also a possibility of the risk of loss. And that is something that you have to decide, is my peace of mind worth less than this perceived loss, right? So it can look like that. And also just know that some people might take these boundaries and feel hurt, and we may want to fix it for them. But if you love them, it's hard to watch that. But remember, you're dealing with somebody who's hurting. And so please just remember to keep your boundaries around them. I recently coached a lady who was telling me about her mother-in-law and how uncomfortable she is around her. And I offered her, I was like, well, you could just tell her, like, if she continues to have that conversation, you're just going to go to your room. And she made this comment that she was like, but she's going to feel bad and she's going to be hurt and she's going to cry. And my question to her was, and then what's that going to mean? And she was like, well, she's going to like keep saying nobody likes her or cares about her. And so I asked her, I said, you have to then decide, who do you want to care about more, yourself or this other person? Because if protecting your peace is more valuable than keeping the person happy, then you will do the very thing that both of you actually get the result, right? So you'll create the boundary so you have the peace, and she gets to sit there and decide whether she is liked or not. And it's not anything against you. It's not anything wrong that you've done. You're not broken. It's just, that's how boundaries go, right? So I want to end this episode by saying, notice in your life where maybe your boundaries are actually very well hidden manuals, and just be willing to be like, does this protect me and does it create safety and peace of mind? Or is it unlike a low-key hidden agenda expectation out of a manual? Because if you are creating boundaries by telling people what to do, then those aren't actually boundaries. Those are manuals. So when you're saying you should call me at this time, or you should only come to my house at this time, then you have an agenda, right? That people should do certain things. Or if you're like, you shouldn't want to host Thanksgiving or Christmas every year. So you have this manual and you're like, well, you need to let me host Thanksgiving and that's my boundary. But really it's a manual because you're like, I should get to, and this person's doing something they're not supposed to. And one of the things that I've learned in just doing my own work is that, pain is equals to suffering times resistance. And so when we spend time like resisting reality and how people are and how life is, we actually end up losing 100% of the time. So I just want to offer you that, like, when you go out and you notice your boundaries, or people have boundaries that maybe you are being informed of, be willing to listen, be willing to be curious, be willing not to make it mean anything negative about you or them for having the boundary, and just be willing to have the perspective of what is actually happening. So that is all I have for you today. I want to remind you that on January 7th at 1:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, I will be hosting a time management and goal setting workshop, and I'd love you to come. It's a free master class. We're going to really plan your year out and set goals for your relationships, your health, your mindset, your well-being, and we'll also create some time management plans, and I will share with you my tried and true method for time management. It is literally the reason I stay sane. It's how I have been able to be an entrepreneur, be a mom, be fully present, have a job as a CRNA, and also coach people, have a podcast, all the things. So I just wanted to offer that to you and invite you to it. And also, I wanted to let you know that we will be skipping the 26th. We'll be skipping an episode so that Cassidy, my podcast producer, and I can take a little break for the holidays, which will mean actually this is the last podcast of the year. Oh my gosh, I just did the math in my head. Yes. So this is the last podcast of the year. We'll be back on January 2nd. Yeah. So this is it for 2022. I just realized it. And we will be hitting our 100th episode in January. And I actually have some fun plans for that episode. It's going to be awesome. Whatever you're doing to celebrate your holidays, I hope you have a great holiday. I hope you enjoy time with your family. It has been such an honor getting to spend this year with you on the podcast. Can't wait to talk to you in the new year. Oh my God. I just had this realization. I'm like, this is it. Yeah, for 2022. This is the last podcast episode of 2022. It's been a great journey. I'm so honored to have you here. And therefore, I guess this will be the second to last announcement for the masterclass. So the sign-up registration link will be on the show notes. So register for the class. Hope to see you there on Zoom. It's going to be epic. And yeah, you know how to reach me. hello@stethoscopestoswaddles.com. And can't wait to chat with you in 2023. Oh my gosh, so crazy. All right, have a great week. Bye now. I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.